The fan you already own is about to do something you were told only a $2,000 machine could do. Feel that. The air moving across your skin right now, it's not cooling the room, it's just pushing warm air around, and your electric bill is climbing anyway. Here's the truth, the appliance stores never put on a sticker. A single box fan, set up the way the Amish set it up, can pull the real temperature of a room down by 15 to 20 degrees. Not the wind chill feeling, the actual number on the thermometer. And it costs you almost nothing to run. I grew up around Amish country, and for years I paid for cold air like everybody else. Then I sat in a farmhouse outside Millersburg, Ohio, in the middle of August, and I spent the first 20 minutes looking for the vent because the house was cool and there was no machine anywhere. There was a fan, there was a window, there was something in between them that changed everything for me. By the end of this, you'll know exactly what that something was, because it traces straight back to a technique written down in a United States government bulletin over 100 years ago, and then quietly forgotten. And before you think this is only for people building a new house from scratch, let me stop you. Every single thing I'm about to show you works in the home you already own tonight. So let me take you back into that kitchen near Millersburg. I was sweating. I want you to understand that. It was 91 degrees outside, the kind of thick Ohio afternoon where your shirt sticks to your back before you finish walking from the truck to the porch. And I walked inside expecting the same heavy air. Instead, I felt it hit my forearms first. Cool, steady, moving. And my first thought, honest to God, was that they'd hidden a unit somewhere, that maybe the modern world had crept in through a back room. So I looked for the thermostat on the wall out of pure habit, the way you and I have done our whole lives. There wasn't one. There was an old man named Amos at the table, and he watched me hunt around the room, and he just smiled, because he'd seen that exact confused look on English visitors before. What he showed me was so simple I almost felt cheated, and that feeling, that it can't be that easy, is the exact feeling the cooling industry has spent a century counting on. Because if the answer were complicated, you'd hire someone. If the answer were expensive, you'd finance it. But the answer is neither. The answer is physics that were understood before your grandfather was born, and the people who sell you comfort would very much prefer you never sit down and do the math. So let's do the math, because the number is going to shock you. When water evaporates, it doesn't just disappear. It takes heat with it. Real heat, measurable heat, pulled directly out of the air around it. Scientists have a figure for this, and it never changes. Every single pound of water that evaporates absorbs roughly 970 units of heat energy out of its surroundings. We call those units BTUs, and that's the same measurement stamped on the side of every air conditioner in every store. Now here's where it gets interesting. A gallon of water weighs about 8 1/3 pounds. Do the multiplication. 1 gallon of water, fully evaporated into the air, pulls out around 8,000 BTUs of heat. Look up a small window air conditioner sometime. A lot of them are rated at 5,000, 6,000, 8,000 BTUs. You are looking at the same cooling power sitting in a bucket for free. That's not folklore. That's the reason a wet cloth in a breeze feels colder than a dry one, and it's the reason the ancient world stayed alive in the desert. The Egyptians knew this 4,000 years ago. They hung wet reed mats across their doorways and windows, and when the dry desert wind blew through the damp fibers, the room behind it dropped cold. The Persians took it even further. They built tall towers called wind catchers that funneled hot outside air down over pools of water underground, and they used that same trick to freeze water in a desert and store ice through the summer in a land where it never snowed. This is documented, ancient, real engineering, not 1 watt of electricity in any of it. Just water, air, and an understanding of heat that we somehow managed to forget the moment we could plug something into a wall. And that forgetting was not an accident. In 1902, a young engineer named Willis Carrier built the first modern electric cooling machine for a printing plant in Brooklyn, New York. He wasn't even trying to cool people. He was trying to control the humidity so the ink wouldn't smear on the paper. But a business was born, and that business had a simple goal: sell you a machine, sell you the power to run it, and sell you the repair when it breaks. Free evaporative cooling was the enemy of that business model. So over the next few decades, As the whole country got wired for electricity, the old knowledge got pushed to the margins. It survived in two places. It survived in the deserts of the Southwest, where people were too practical to ignore it, and it survived in Amish country among people who never plugged in to begin with. But here's the tension, and I want you to sit with it. That 8,000 BTU number I just gave you has a catch, and if you don't understand the catch, your homemade cooler will fail and you'll swear the whole thing was a lie. The catch is humidity. Evaporative cooling only works when the air is dry enough to accept the water. In the deserts of Arizona, where the University of Arizona has studied these systems for decades, evaporative coolers routinely drop the incoming air by 20, 30, even 40 degrees, using about a quarter of the electricity a normal air conditioner burns, 25 cents on the dollar. But take that same cooler to a swamp in Louisiana in July when the air is already soaked and it barely does a thing because the air has no room left to hold more moisture. This is the single most important thing nobody tells you in those flashy videos. And it's exactly why the Amish version I saw in Ohio was smarter than the crude fan and a bowl of ice trick you may have already tried and given up on. Because Amos wasn't relying on evaporation alone. He was stacking 3 different old techniques on top of each other, and each one covered the weakness of the others. Let me give you the first one, and this is the one you can set up in the next 10 minutes. Take a box fan, any box fan. Now take a bath towel, soak it in cold water, and wring it out until it stops dripping but stays heavy and damp. Hang that towel across the back of the fan, the intake side, the side that pulls air in, not the front, the back. Now put a shallow pan of ice water underneath and let the bottom edge of the towel sit in it so it wicks the water up and stays wet on its own like a lamp wick. Turn the fan on low. What happens next is the whole secret. The fan pulls warm room air through the wet fabric, the water evaporates into that moving air, it steals the heat, and what comes out the front is air that can be 15 to 20 degrees cooler than what went in. In dry conditions, you just built a swamp cooler out of a towel and a fan, and most people stop right there. That's the mistake. Because if you only do that and your house is humid, you'll add moisture to a room that's already damp and you'll feel worse, not better. So the Amish never did just one thing. They controlled where the cool came from and where the warm went. And that brings me to the part they almost never show the English, the part that separates a gimmick from an actual system. Now, if you already own a house and you're thinking this only applies to people building from scratch, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. I'm talking to you if your home was built before 1980, because your home has something newer homes threw away and it's sitting under your feet right now, your basement, or your crawl space, or if you're lucky, a real root cellar. The ground below the frost line holds a nearly constant temperature all year long. In most of the country, the earth about 10 feet down sits somewhere between 50 and 56 degrees, winter and summer, no exceptions. That's why the old-timers stored their potatoes and their milk and their meat down there before refrigeration existed. The United States Department of Agriculture published bulletin after bulletin on this in the early 1900s, teaching farm families exactly how to build a root cellar that held 32 to 40 degrees through the hottest August, and a spring house that held around 50, all with nothing but earth, stone, and a little running water. That cold didn't go anywhere. If your house has a basement, you are standing on top of a natural cooling reservoir that the previous owner probably never once used for comfort. Here's how the Amish tapped it, and how you can tonight. Cool air is heavy, it sinks and pools in the lowest part of your house, in that basement, and it just sits there. Warm air is light. It rises and collects at the top of your house, upstairs, at the ceiling, in the attic. This is called the stack effect, and it is the invisible engine behind every naturally cool old farmhouse in America. So you don't fight it, you use it. You open a low basement window or the basement door and let that 55-degree air have a path. Then you put a fan in an upstairs window, but here's the trick. You point it to blow out, not in. You exhaust the hot air out the top of your house. And when that hot air leaves, it creates a gentle suction, a negative pressure that pulls the cool, heavy basement air up through your living space to replace it. You are not making cold air. You are moving cold air that was already free from where it's useless to where you're sitting, Most people put their fan in the window pointing in, blowing hot outside air onto themselves, and they wonder why it never helps. You just learn to do the opposite, and it changes the whole house. And this is the moment I need to tell you something, because what I just handed you is one room out of a whole house full of these methods, and it would be a shame to give you the cooling and let the rest stay buried. Everything I learned sitting with families in Lancaster County and Holmes County, the heating, the cooling, the pantry that keeps food for months without a freezer, the pest control with no chemicals, the off-grid water and light, I gathered it all into one collection called the Complete Amish Home System, and it walks you through the house, room by room, the way Amos walked me through his... It's linked in the description below. There's a QR code on your screen you can scan right now, and there's a special limited time offer on it as I'm recording this, because this kind of knowledge was taken from regular families like yours, and I'd rather you have it back. Now let me get back to the fan, because we're about to get to the part that made me sit down in that kitchen and go quiet. Because so far, everything I've shown you handles a dry day or a house with a good basement, but you and I both know the worst nights are the humid ones. The nights when the air won't cool off, when the fan just pushes soup around the room, when you lie there at 2 in the morning peeling the sheet off your leg, that's when a swamp cooler quits on you. And that's the exact problem Amos solved with the third technique. The one I'd never read in any modern guide, the one that traces back to that old government paperwork I mentioned at the start. So let me set it up, because you need the full picture before the answer lands the way it landed on me. The problem with humid heat is that you can't add water to the air, because the air is already full. So evaporation is off the table. But the Amish still stayed cool on those nights, in houses with no machine at all. How? They stopped thinking about making cold, and they started thinking about storing cold. They used the temperature swing between night and day like a battery. Here's what most people never notice. Even on a miserable summer day, the temperature drops at night. It might be 94 at 4 in the afternoon and 71 by 4 in the morning. That's a 23-degree gift that falls out of the sky every single night for free, and almost everybody sleeps through it and wastes it. The Amish did not waste it. They opened the house up wide in the cool of the night, and they ran air through it hard, on purpose, to chill everything inside. Not just the air, the walls, the floors, the furniture, the heavy plaster and stone and wood. They call the modern version of this night flushing, and it's the same principle. Those thick-walled farmhouses were built around 150 years ago. And then, this is the key, before the sun came up, they shut the whole house tight. Windows closed, curtains drawn, sealed like a thermos. All that cool they packed into the walls and floors overnight stays trapped inside, radiating coolness back into the rooms all day long, while the heat bakes uselessly against a closed, shaded house. By the time the afternoon peaks outside, the inside is still holding on to last night's cool like a stone holds cold from a creek. You do that with your fan. At night, that upstairs fan blows out, you open the house, you flush every degree of cool night air through it as hard as you can for a few hours. At dawn, you close it up, every window, every shade, especially the ones the morning and afternoon sun hit. You trap the cool. You keep the heat outside where it belongs. It sounds too simple to matter. It is the difference between a house that's 85 inside by noon and a house that's still sitting at 72. But here's where the tension has been building this whole time, because I've given you 3 good techniques, and every one of them has a gap. The swamp cooler dies in humidity. The basement trick needs a basement. The night flush needs a cool night. And Amos knew all of that better than any engineer I've ever met. So he did the one thing that ties all 3 together into a system that works anywhere, in any weather, and that finally is the thing I found written down in the old records. That's the finale. That's what I drove home thinking about. Let me tell you where it came from first, because the story is the proof. Back in the 1800s and early 1900s, before anyone could plug in a machine, keeping a house and a family cool wasn't a luxury, it was survival. People died in heat waves, and everybody knew it. So the knowledge of how to cool a home naturally was serious, practical, tested knowledge, and a lot of it got written down. The Department of Agriculture printed cheap little booklets, the Farmers' Bulletins, and they mailed them to farm families all across the country, teaching them how to build ice houses, how to dig root cellars, how to position a house and its windows and its trees so it stayed livable through August, Millions of these were printed, and then electricity came, and the machines came, and those booklets went into attic boxes and estate sales, and got pulped, and 2 generations later, almost nobody remembered any of it. Almost nobody. The Amish kept living it because they never had the machine to make them forget. And the single most powerful thing in those old pages, the thing Amos was really doing that day, was this. He combined evaporation with thermal mass and a wind path, and he aimed all of it at one cheap, heavy, forgotten material, whetstone, or in the old houses, a wall of it. In Amos's house, it was simpler than that. It was a rack of unglazed clay, terracotta, the same red clay a flower pot is made of, soaked in water and set in the path of the fan, in front of the cool air coming up from below. Here's why that one detail is the whole secret. Unglazed clay is porous. It drinks water deep into its body and holds it. So when the fan blows across it, it doesn't just evaporate a thin film off the surface like a towel does and then dry out in 20 minutes. It slowly sweats moisture out of its entire mass for hours, cooling the air the whole time, and because the clay itself is heavy and dense, it also acts as thermal mass, staying cold and steady long after the ice water is gone. The Egyptians cooled their water in porous clay jars for exactly this reason. Farmers kept their butter cold in a clay pot inside a wet cloth for exactly this reason. It's called a pot-and-pot cooler, and studies in hot, dry regions have measured the inside of one running 20 to 30 degrees cooler than the air around it, with no power at all, just 2 clay pots, wet sand between them, and a breeze. So here is the whole system, the thing you can build this weekend, the thing they were never supposed to let you rediscover. You take your box fan. Behind it, on the intake side, you set a stack of cheap, unglazed terracotta, the plain reddish clay saucers and pots from any garden store, and you keep the bottom of them sitting in a shallow tray of cold water so they stay soaked all day, wicking like a wick. You position that fan at the top of the cool air path coming up from your basement so it's pulling already cooled 55-degree air across that wet clay. And you run the whole thing inside a house that you flushed cool last night and sealed tight at dawn. Now every weakness is covered. The clay gives you slow, steady evaporation that lasts hours instead of minutes. The basement gives you cold air even when the day is humid. The night flush and the sealed house give you a cool starting point so nothing has to work very hard. 3 forgotten techniques, stacked, doing together what none of them could do alone. That is what a $2,000 machine does, built out of a fan, a bath towel, a few dollars of clay pots, and the ground under your own house. And the second you feel it work, you're going to feel something else too, something I felt driving back that evening. A little bit of anger, because this was never lost. It was written down by our own government and mailed to our own great-grandparents, and somewhere along the way somebody decided we were better off renting our comfort back from them 1 month at a time. The Amish just never signed up for the deal. I want you to think about the money for a second, not to scare you, just to be honest. The average American home spends hundreds of dollars every summer running a machine to do a job that water, clay, dirt, and moving air did for free for 4,000 years. Over a lifetime, that's tens of thousands of dollars paid out for something the desert peoples and the farm families and the Amish never paid a dime for. That's not a small thing. That's a family vacation every year. That's the thing you fix on the truck. That's real money that walked out of your house because a booklet got pulped and a salesman had a nicer story. But now you have the older story. Now you have the one that came first. So here's what I want you to actually do, and I want you to keep it simple, because simple is the whole point. This week, before you spend one more dollar being hot, try the first step by itself. Soak a towel, hang it on the back of a box fan, set the bottom edge in a pan of cold water, and sit in front of it on a dry afternoon. Feel the temperature drop with your own skin, the way I did, so you stop doubting and start building. Then add the basement path. Then add the night flush and the morning seal. Then, when you're ready, add the clay. Stack it the way Amos stacked it. By the end of the summer, you'll have a cool house and a fan that cost you pennies a day, and you'll wonder, like I did, how you ever believed comfort had to come with a monthly bill. Because that's the real thing you're getting back here. It was never really about a fan. It was about the moment you realize a comfortable home was never supposed to be something you rent. It was something you knew how to make, with your own hands, out of the cheapest materials on earth, and somebody talked you out of it. Today you talked yourself back into it. If you're the kind of person who's always felt that real, practical knowledge got quietly shoved aside so somebody else could keep sending you a bill, then you already know this channel is where that knowledge comes back out of the attic. So do me one favor. Tell me down in the comments which piece surprised you the most. The clay pot that sweats cold for hours, or the fan in the upstairs window blowing out instead of in. Pick one and tell me, because I read them and I want to know which forgotten thing hit you hardest. Don't just think it, type it. This audience never speaks up, and your comment is what puts this in front of the next person who needs it. And if you want the rest of what Amos and the others showed me, subscribe and stand with the people who are pulling this knowledge back into the light where it belongs, one room at a time. Because the next thing I'm going to show you is how those same families keep an entire winter's worth of food from spoiling in the heat of summer with no freezer, no electricity, and one shelf in a corner most people walk right past. You're going to want to be here for that one. I'll see you inside.